and other concerns. Just do it in 20 trips in 38 years. Says Rashi that this is the very reason why Hashem tells Moshe, I want you to relate and review those trips. So you should know and you should realize that I was actually very nice to you. I took care of you by making sure that you don't wander too much. You don't have to keep on going. It seems like every few days, barely catching their breath and moving on. And again, continuing. It wasn't. In some of the places, there was deer settled for years, not only weeks or months. At the beginning of the Parasha. Now, what is interesting in this Parasha is something very every year. And what I'm referring to is to this coming Shabbat. This coming Shabbat is Rosh Chodesh, the new month of Av, which is our new month. The beginning of Av is a new month which is mentioned in this week's Parsha, which basically means we are going to read on the first day of Av an event which took place in the first day of Av, and the day it took place, which is this Shabbos. What took place on the first day of Av? If you have a Chumash, you can see on page 920, or in the English 921, verse 37 and 38. What does it say on verse 37, 38? It says, Vayisu mikodesh. They traveled from a place called Kadesh. Vayachanu behor biktzei eretz Edom. And they camped on a place called Hor Ohor. Or Ohor, that's the name of the place, which is on the edge of the land of Edom. What happens there? Says verse 38, Vayal Aaron al pi Hashem, a word of Hashem, Vayom Hashem, and he died there in Oir. He passed away. When did it happen? Bishnas Oarboim, on the 40th year, Letzeis Bnei Yisrael mi Eretz Mitzrayim. The 40th year from when the Jewish people had left the land of Egypt. When did it happen on the 40th year? B'chodesh HaChamishi, the 5th month, Be'echad lachodesh, the first day of that 5th month. When is the 5th month from on the Jewish calendar? Is this coming Shabbat? Nisan is called the 1st month, Iyar is the 2nd month, Sivan is the 3rd. We are now in the 4th month, and this Shabbos, it begins the 5th month, which is also called Av or Menachem Av. So the Torah tells us that on this Shabbos, the 1st of Av, is actually when Aaron passed away. The age Aaron was, says the Torah on verse 39, Ve'Aaron ben Sholosh ve'esrim u'me'as shana. And Aaron was 123 years old, be'moisoi be'oir when he had passed away on that place called Oir. Aaron passed away. Because again, like I said, this is very unusual to talk about Aaron's passing, about Aaron's death, and it's going to be read in the Torah the day of his anniversary, called the day of his Yortzeit. The Shabbos is the Yortzeit of Aaron. The interesting thing is, we had all kinds of great people that we are familiar with, especially in the Chumash, who can be greater than Moshe. Does the Torah say when Moshe passed away? No. Even though there is a very specific description about his passing. If you go to the end of the Chumash, Parasha's V'zot Bracha, the last 8 verses is basically discussing and describing Moshe's death. And the Talmud discusses how was it written by Moshe, if Moshe wrote the entire Torah, how did he write about his death? And the Talmud said that God told him the words and he wrote it. A whole discussion how the description of Moshe's death is recorded. But we have a recorded description about what happened and how it happened and where it happened when Moshe died, not knowing where is he buried. Is there a date? No. We don't have the date in the Torah. Talmudic tradition teaches us that he passed away on the 7th day of Adar, which is a few weeks before they entered the land of Israel, and a few weeks after he began repeating the entire Chumash, the book of Dvarim. But the Torah does not tell us the day he passed away. We don't have the day recorded, not in the Torah, not in the Tanakh, nowhere in the prophets, nowhere you're going to find the days of his passing. Then you have their sister, Miriam. A few weeks ago, in Pashat Chukas, we have learned about Miriam's passing. Thomas Miriam, right? When did it happen? The Torah doesn't tell us anything. Why not? If you wouldn't have tell us Aaron's date, so then you can assume that for some reason the Torah is not looking to record the names, or it doesn't find it of necessity to record the dates for whatever reason. We're going to have to also understand why. But the very fact that by one of the people you do have his date of passing mentioned, and the rest of them you don't, raises the question, what is it about Aaron that his day of passing is the only one recorded in this Torah portion? Not only in this Torah portion, in the entire Torah. And Tanakh. Does anybody know Avram's yahrzeit? I don't know. Yitzchak's yahrzeit? Yaakov's yahrzeit? So you would say, okay, it happened before the Torah was given. But now we're talking a chain of passings which took place in the family in 1 year. They all died in 1 year. Started Miriam, followed by Aaron. 6 months later, Moshe's passing. And yet, the only one that his day of passing is actually recorded in the Chumash is Aaron and nobody else. If you look in the Rambam, Maimonides, in his book called Moreh Nevuchim, the famous book, the Guide to the Perplexed, the book of philosophy by the Rambam, he actually discusses what is the purpose of the 42 journeys that the Torah mentions. And he says, why does the Torah mention names of places without discussing events which took place there? So you're going to say some of the events we actually know what happened because they are recorded in the Torah. So he's relying on our memory. But yeah, there are other places which we don't know what happened. Maybe nothing happened there, right? Maybe actually nothing happened. Not every place where they camped, they started complaining and making trouble. Some of them they did. But some of them maybe nothing happened. And the Rambam says in his Guide to the Perplexed, what is the reason for mentioning these names? He says, because it's going to come years later. And the so-called realists, you know, the realists are people that take or consider themselves very realistic. And they look on life as if they have all the facts. Says the Rambam are going to say, it's impossible that you have over 1 million people living in the desert without being supported with some type of physical support, food, water, and shelter, etc. And the historians are going to come and say they must have traveled the desert by the edges of other cities. And that's where they got their physical support. Near that city, near the other city, and along the way is where the food was provided for them and drink was provided for them. We know in this biblical story that nothing was provided for them. The only time they're arriving nearby actual cities is now, the last few journeys on their way to the land. And even then there is big trouble. Those nearby neighbors don't want to support them with no bread, no water, and many of the other stories which we're actually going to read in the next book, the book of Dvarim. So the Rambam says that the reason why the Torah is mentioning the names, because it's not about the events which took place in those names. Rather, it's about the places themselves, to know that if you go look where those places are, they are in the desolated desert and nearby to nothing. Yet, they survived it. And then perhaps you're going to realize that you have to believe in what happened with the story of the manna and the water of the well of Miriam, and so on. And therefore, the Torah is not looking to share with us events, rather to share with us addresses, because that's the main thing. And obviously, this raises the question even further, how comes there is one place which the event which took place in that place is mentioned with such detail, Aaron specific? Matter of fact, we are some of us may be dealing with short-term memory loss, but you go back to, I'm talking about myself, you go back to Parshas Chukas, which wasn't too long ago, if even I remember, because it was only 3 weeks ago. How can you forget Chukas? You read Parshas Chukas, and it was in that Parasha, which was very clearly described the amazing passing of Aaron. So it was 2 weeks ago. Chukas, then came Balak, and then came Pinchas 3 weeks ago. David, even you remember 3 weeks ago what happened. Exactly. You remember that it happened 3 weeks ago. That's also good.
You wasn't here.
Ooh, I wasn't if I remember. So they came to a place called Hoyroor. You can look it up on page 846, 847 in the Torah, with great detail. Hashem tells Moshe and Aaron, you are going to be gathered to your people. You're not coming into the land. Moshe is asked to bring up Aaron and Aaron's son, Elazar, come up on this mountain called Orahor. He's being told to remove his priestly garments. Elazar to dress them. He should see that his responsibility as high priest is now being transformed from him to his son Elazar. Moshe is going up on the mountain. Aaron removes his priestly garment. Elazar puts them on. Aaron dies. Moshe and Elazar come down the mountain, and everybody sees Aaron dying. And there is a 30-day mourning period, a month. So there's a month mourning period, which, as the Torah says, something very special about that mourning period, which again does not say by none of the other people who died. If you look on that page 848, verse 29, it says, Vayiru kolo edo ki gova Aaron, and the entire assembly saw that Aaron had perished. Vayifku es Aaron shloshim yom. They wept for Aaron 30 days, a month. Koil Beis Yisrael, the entire house of Israel. The entire house of Israel. Who is the entire house? Men, women, children, everybody. And the Talmud actually makes the following note, that if you go in the end of the Chumash, where it talks about the passing of Moshe, and it does speak about his death, so it says that he died on page 1122, if you want to look it up, verse 6, verse 5, I'm sorry, it says, Vayomosh Moshe Eved Hashem be'eretz Moav al pi Hashem. Moshe, the servant of Hashem, died there in the land of Moab by the mouth of Hashem. And Moshe ben 120 shana b'mato, Moshe was 120 years when he had passed. Lo koaso einoi v'lo nos leichoi, he was fresh, and nothing wrong was with him. His vigor had not diminished. And he died on the age of 120. And what happened when he died? So verse 9 says, verse 8 says, Vayifku bnei Yisrael es Moshe be'arvos Moav 30 yom. The children of Israel also bewailed Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. So Aaron is having 30 days mourning period. Moshe is having a 30-day mourning period. But there's one difference. One little word, 2 letters in Hebrew, kol. What does kol mean? The entire. By Aaron it says, kol bnei Yisrael, the entire assembly of Israel. By Moshe it says, who cried? Bnei Yisrael. Doesn't say all. Wasn't the entire assembly. Some cried, some didn't. Some thought to themselves, it was a great man, 120 years, and it was great. They were waiting to read his obituary in the New York Times and watching what this person wrote about him and the other person wrote about him, and I'm sure they all said something to share about him, but that's it. And some were crying, some felt that they lost the greatest loss, but not everybody was on the same page. Aaron, everybody's going crazy. So the question number 2 is, not only why is Aaron's yahrzeit mentioned, which we don't find in the other sages, the question is mainly, why is it that this was such a special passing that we have the details? 3 weeks ago, we have all the details. Why do you have to mention it in a place when specifically, as the Rambam actually explains, the Torah was not looking to tell you what happened in those places. The Torah was only looking to give you names of locations, so you should know that the great miracle of the desert was that you were in so-called in isolated places, and you were still taken care of. And that's why there is no events mentioned, but the only event of Aaron's passing. These are 2 questions, what we are trying to understand today. Some commentaries are mentioning this concept of a tragic event in a tragic month. In other words, we all know that this coming month, starting on Shabbat, is a month which, according to Jewish law, we are to diminish in our excitement and happiness. This is the month which the 9th of Av, in its peak, brought about a number of historical tragedies to us as a nation, all the way to the point of the destruction of the first and second temple. And historically, as we mentioned many times, there were other events till recently which actually began or took place in that time period in the 9th of Av. So some say the Torah is kind of indicating us it's a tragic month. You know when the tragedy started? When Aaron died. Aaron died because this is the type of month that we're dealing with loss, kind of to say. But obviously, we know the story of Purim, and when we talk about the Talmud tells us about Moshe's Haman's excitement that his decree fell in the month of Adar, thinking that this is why it's happening this month. It's a very good month because Moses died in that month. So we know that there was already a time in history that somebody had associated the passing of a great individual in that month to lead to the so-called the feel and to the appreciation, if we can use the word, in regard to tragedy. Little did he know that it was also Moses' birthday. So somehow the birthday overrated the passing, and Adar turned out to be a happy month. But needless to say, that the fact that it could have happened such a tragedy as Haman's decree related to Moses' passing would have also make sense that we should have Moses' name mentioned, Moses' date of passing mentioned in the Torah, and then we would know why Haman was about to attack us, because Moses died. And yet the Torah somehow does not find it necessary to record. So I don't think that this is so great of an explanation why Aaron's death is mentioned. Let's speak for a moment. What is the idea of a person's passing? The anniversary of his passing, called the Yortzeit. Where do we find this concept of a Yortzeit? Where in tradition do we find the concept of a Yortzeit? The truth is, in the Torah, in the Chumash, you're not going to find the concept of Yortzeit. Even in the rest of the Tanakh, there is not too many references to that concept called Yortzeit. There are some verses which talk about people who gathered in a certain place around the life of someone, but again, this is not clear sources. Some use it, some question it. If you look in the books, we are trying to figure out the source for Yortzeit. You're going to see that more or less in the Chumash itself, in the Tanakh itself, very rarely do we find a concept of a Yortzeit. Yortzeit referring to the anniversary of your parents' passing. We do find in the Talmud, mainly in two places. In one place is also very indirectly. There's a tract of Talmud called Nedarim. Nedarim means vows. And there's a tract of Talmud which is devoted for that subject of vows. What is a vow? How can you not cancel a vow? How can you nullify a vow? Can somebody cancel it for you? How strict is a vow? There's all kinds of hundreds of scenarios of vows, which is actually the beginning of this week's Parasha, the importance of not to desecrate your words and making sure that when you say something, you should keep up to it. So the Gemara says the following scenario. Somebody took a vow that I am not going to drink wine all year, just as I don't drink wine every year on the day when my parents passed away. Oops. Here we see that somehow people really experience at the day when their parents passed away, they didn't drink wine. And that's why it is a scenario, it is a discussion in the Talmud, again, about a person who vowed not to drink wine like we don't drink, like he doesn't drink when his parents passed away. The day they passed away, not every day since they passed away, but rather every year, the day they passed away. This is one of the first sources that of people even relating some significance to the day of their parents' passing, which we call Yortzeit. The second place is not in Talmud, but there is a Talmudic discussion where the rabbis were kind of contemplating about an issue, and the Talmud says they decided to wait for that, the way it's called, Shapsa de Rigla, the Shabbos, or the day in the week when everybody is going to come. Rashi says what kind of day is it referring to? Says Rashi something interesting. That there was the custom that when the rabbi anniversary of his passing arrived, so all the students used to get together by his gravesite on that day. And therefore, the Talmud mentions that when there was a difficult question to resolve, let's wait for that time when they're all going to come around the gravesite of our teacher, and then we can probably bring brainstorm they were dealing with. So this is yet another source for this idea called yahrzeit. Other than that, very far-fetched. You know what far-fetched means? Like, we don't find a lot of meaty, juicy sources or discussions about yahrzeit. Until we came to the revelation of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. Jewish mysticism, starting with the Zohar, they introduced the idea of yahrzeit as something very critical, so to speak, to the one who died and to the ones who are connected by relationship of either blood relationship or spiritual relationship to the one who died. Obviously, we are familiar with a great big yahrzeit, which is being celebrated according to his request of the author of the Zohar, called Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, every year on Lag BaOmer. Right? This is his day of passing. So he, who in the Zohar does discuss in detail and in great insight what an anniversary of passing is, did request and made sure to have his yahrzeit celebrated. And once we have the Zohar, now the ongoing tradition across the board, Hasidim, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, Teimanim, whatever type of experience you have in Judaism, across the board, there is this concept called yahrzeit. Matter of fact, some communities are more into their yahrzeit than any other life experience, any other Jewish experience. The yahrzeit is like, maybe you want to consider your father's lifestyle, your grandfather's, your grandmother's lifestyle, bring it into your life. No, that's not for me. But the yahrzeit, I will observe. The yahrzeit is going to be kept. Today, I'm going to make sure to be there. People are very careful. And I know here in the Eastside Torah Center, people sometimes come in to put on tefillin, to say Kaddish. I get calls about a minyan. Is there going to be a minyan? And I don't even know who the person is. But he comes. What happened? That's my father's yahrzeit, my mother's yahrzeit. That's a very common part of tradition is to observe people's yahrzeits. People are doing and preserving the yahrzeit, and some light up candles, and some say Kaddish. It's like, you pay attention to it. Some people go to the gravesite. What happens at a yahrzeit? Just because that day he passed away, and then what? What happens at any anniversary? You're married. You have your wedding anniversary. What's a wedding anniversary? Nothing. Nothing happens on the day. It's a way to somehow remark the fact that we were married and remind ourselves that we are married, and maybe consider to be married better and to treat each other better It's a day of a little reflection. That's what the anniversary is, nothing else. Meaning, in the scope of things, if you consider, let's say if you can see what happens in the cosmos or somehow in the world above you, around you, you're not going to see anything being experienced on that day. There's another chuppah taking place again. And somehow the blessing which was said at your chuppah is being re-recited. If you want, you can watch the video again if it makes you excited, but it doesn't mean that it's happening. Nothing is happening. Just a day. Matter of fact, some people forget about their anniversary day. They're in trouble. But as far as the day of the anniversary is, even the Rebbe, only at I think his 30th anniversary, he mentioned that. The Shabbos of his 30th anniversary was 1954. So he said over the same Hasidic discourse which the previous Rebbe said at his wedding. And he shared some customs of wedding and spoke a little bit about it. Mainly in the context, there was another few people who were going to get married that week. It was less about his personal wedding. And it was his 50th anniversary, which is 1979. There was more than that. He spoke a little bit. Hasidim gave him a blessing. But again, you're not going to find things are being re-experienced at a wedding anniversary or the day I found my first job. Might be a good passport for you, a question on your passport security questions, but right? If I ask you what was the day that you found your first job, but it's not something, or maybe, it's on your calendar, but it doesn't mean that every on that day you're going to find a new job, okay? But at least you hope not. But what happens at a yard site? The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, a letter that the Alter Rebbe wrote to this community of Berdichev. Berdichev is the famous city, town in Ukraine, with a great tzaddik, the colleague of the Alter Rebbe by the name of Reb Levi Yitzchak Berdichev lived there. And Reb Yitzchak Berdichev passed away before the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe is now writing to them a letter of condolences. I want to read you 2 or 3 lines of the letter and to see actually what it says there. And this actually explains what a yard site is. And this is what it says. Just a second. I have to find it over here in English. It's going to be a little. Just give me a minute. I think anybody who stayed at home to watch what's it called is not so happy with me tonight. They're not showing their faces, which is usually a sign that they're busy with something else. It could be they don't hear. No. Yo 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 yo. Is there 2 volumes to the letters?
I think there is.
It is, right?
That's the epistle, right?
Yeah. No, it's here.
Oh, how do I open that? You see? This is the letter 27 and 26. The Alter Rebbe wrote this letter in a letter of condolences to his Hasidim in 1788, after the passing of his colleague and mentor, that was the mentor of Vitebsk, mentor of Aradok, who settled in Israel, and he passed away in 1777. So the Alter Rebbe discusses, and it's all based on the Zohar. And he says, what happens when a person passes away, his life or spirit, and now that his neshama is gone, so he's still connected to everyone, and so on and on. And then he explains it. And basically the idea is that every year a neshama works is that the neshama is connected, obviously, and once it leaves the body, it gets connected even with greater strength, with greater force, because there's no limitations of the body. And what he says is that basically every year, on the day of the Yortzeit, there is a so-called a jump that is to a much higher level, which that level of spirit that soul never yet experienced. It's almost as if we would use the physical terms, we would say that every year the neshama goes further away from us.
It's elevated.
But it's not really further away. It gets stronger and it gets higher in its spiritual elevation. And the people who are connected to the neshama are also receiving a greater connection and experience by the fact that they are able to benefit from that jump. That's what the Yortzeit represents. So in other words, it is not just a day of remembering, but it's a day in which the neshama does experience something which is waiting for the day to experience it. And that's why the Zohar calls it Hilula. Hilula means a celebration. Not a celebration for those who are here, because we are getting further in distance, but it's a celebration for the soul. The soul is awaiting to experience that Yortzeit experience. And that is the day when those who are connected to the soul are doing activities in merit of the soul. They say Kaddish, they give tzedakah, some go to visit the grave, they share their stories, they are looking to bring in some type of that life legacy which was led by the person into their personal lives. And that's how they are going. That's what makes the Yortzeit a day of content. It gives it some meaning. So this is one of the so-called revelations in the world of Kabbalah. In the world of mysticism, we were introduced with the value of what takes place at a Yortzeit. But like I said before, in the Gemara, the most you're going to find is the two sources I mentioned to you. Either they gathered by the gravesite, or somehow people did not eat. Why didn't they eat? Because every year you came the day that you remember that you lost your father or mother, you felt the pain of it. and you didn't want to eat. You wanted to maybe improve yourself by not eating, like the Rambam said. Anytime a person doesn't eat, it's a greater chance to become closer spiritually. So maybe that was the way they related to their parents with their lives. Even in Shulchan Aruch, in the code of Jewish law, Yortzeit is associated with a personal fast day for the ones who lost their parents. It's only the Kabbalists and Hasidim who don't fast on a day of a Yortzeit. In Jewish mysticism, the Yortzeit aspect was taken out, mainly because fasting would not encourage you to reflect on the day. It would rather put you a little, you would spend the day less excitingly when you fast. So better have your coffee and experience the Yortzeit. Going back to Aaron. We are going back to Aaron. The Torah is telling us what happened and when it happened that Aaron died. Is it really because the Torah wants to introduce to us the importance of Aaron's date of Pesach, which is the 5th of Av? Yes. Why is it important to know? Really, it has to do with the fact because the message of Aaron's life is such an important message that the Torah finds an opportunity for us to reflect on his life and think about him, especially in his Yortzeit week, when we are usually reading this Parasha. We're always reading this Parasha on Aaron's Yortzeit. Sometimes it's a few days before, sometimes it's a few days after, always around the week that is passed. This year, it happens to be at the very same day of his passing, which is this coming Shabbos. But always it's around the time. And the reason is because the life of Aaron is the very fact that everybody cried, as Rashi says, because he was a person whose life was, what was his life? What was Aaron's life?
He brought peace to everybody.
Exactly. The Torah wants to emphasize the importance of peace and unity, and that's why the Torah finds it necessary to know that at least day of passing, we should all remember that he passed away, and hopefully reflect on the importance of unity and peace the way it was brought by Aaron. He wasn't just a man of peace and unity. He really meant it. There is a few words what the Torah says about Aaron that really tells you the whole story about Aaron. This goes back in the book of Shmot. Moshe tells God, "You sure I should be the one going to Pharaoh? I have my brother Aaron. He's older than me. He stayed in Egypt. I'm coming from Midian. Why shouldn't Aaron do it?" And God says, "I want you to be the one doing it." But what does he say about Aaron? God doesn't ignore the remarks that Moses made about the fact that he had an elderly brother there. But God says amazing, unbelievable words. Veroacho vesomach beliboy. Aaron is going to see you when you come to do the mission, and he is going to be truly happy in his heart for the fact that you were appointed to do the job of being the Redeemer. This is a whole different level. It's not just, I'm giving in to a situation. God wants it. I guess that's the way it has to be. Who am I to argue? Even though I'm a little verkvetched and I would have rather liked to do it myself. But who am I to start up with God? God knows better. No. Genuine simcha, joy in Aaron's heart, the fact that Moshe has the job. And that's how his life was with everybody. Really genuine, with his simcha, with his happiness and joy for somebody else's, in somebody else's success, and when he was able to bring unity to other people. And we all know the story, the way he was going around and uniting people and taking care of broken relationships in all kinds of various ways, which Moshe didn't do. Moshe was busy with great things, but he wasn't doing it. The Torah tells us, I want you to know when he passed away, because his legacy and his life experience is the that's going to come every year. The day that it passed, like we said before from the Kabbalah, that the day when a person passes, the soul is now revealed in a higher level and shares and channels from his life experience to all those who are
We cannot hear anything.
I think I'm going to leave the meeting.